Hello, folks. I'm back. We're continuing to work on Rogue Deck Builder. So I've made some progress. Admittedly, I have not made much progress in the last few days. It's probably my own fault. I had this tweet go totally freaking viral and probably shouldn't have even said what I said now that I think about it, but can't take it back. And I'd rather just kind of like stand by what I said, but it is what it is, and I'm getting some things done, so it's okay. I will continue to prototype this game come hell or high water. So I've basically finished. Oh, actually, this is a really good starting thing. At the end of my last stream, I was kind of just playing through a version of the game where I've got these events in place, right? So you can walk up to one of these event markers, hit the E key, and then get a bonus resource. And I was just doing a quick playthrough to see how that would work, see kind of where that would lead in terms of gameplay, see if it was fun, all that stuff. Um, Turns out it's pretty good actually. Still kind of hitting that natural frenetic slash frantic pace that this game has, just due to what it is. Um, but then I kind of thought, okay, well that's good enough feedback. I enjoyed that playthrough, which was cool, but I want to kind of keep probing a little bit further and improve on some of this. I feel like I can't really form as good of an impression of what the gameplay is until I fix a little bit of these. Um, not wouldn't necessarily call them technical issues, but I would call them like gameplay problems, where it's like right now the collision. I actually disabled collision for the buildings because, and then maybe that's one thing that I could do. I could just disable collision for buildings. Um, yeah, that might not be the worst option, actually, because then you could still play the game. But I think I just want to see what the game, how the game plays when you can sort of like walk between buildings. So like, let's say that I was to, oh, I can't actually place that, but um, let's say that there were a turret here as well, and I want to like walk between these two things. I think that just if I was looking at this, right, just eyeballing it, my intuition is that I should be able to walk between those two buildings, right? I don't feel like I shouldn't be able to walk between them. I feel like I should. And then if that's true, um, what does that mean, right? That means I've probably got to, I should probably make that work. So I think what I want to have is a game that comes to mind. I don't know if you've played it. It was doing really well on Steam actually last summer. It's a game called Novalands. Um, Really fun game. Kind of like I would sort of characterize it as like Kids Factorio. So it's like maybe a little lighter, more simplified version of Factorio. Lots of fun. Just like so much fun to play. Love that game. But you then there's a lot of these kind of like pixel art buildings, and you can sort of walk behind them. You can always walk in between. You may like kind of clip behind them, but you can always kind of like walk in the space between them, and I really liked that. It always felt like I could build, but then at the same time I could also kind of like walk between that space, which is really cool to me. So that's the sort of thing that I'm trying to create here is I want there to be all these buildings on the deck, but I also want you to be able to walk between them, and I do want you to like collide up against them. I don't want, because otherwise it doesn't feel like it's really there. You know, like you shouldn't be able to do this, like just walk over it. That's wrong. So I want to at least get that system working more or less, right? So I would say this falls squarely into the category of collision detection and response, right? So I've got, if you've seen some of my previous streams, I have like a boatload of these kinds of systems in the game. So here's one, just like one example, right? Like this is the guy, um, this is the deck collision system, right? And so it's just a debug mode that I can go through to like kind of help me sort of sort out what the parameters or like how the collision system should work. Like what should the area of the player's collision rectangle be with respect to the deck, right? Where's kind of that ground point that's sort of like, I call the ground point this little point between his feet. We call that ground. That's actually kind of relevant because if the ground point is like all the way over here, like the ground point should only go to the edge of the deck, right? And the ground point should only ever go like up here to this edge. So whatever this collision rectangle is, it needs to kind of work in such a way as this ground point doesn't go off the deck, right? Even if we're talking about like two-dimensional graphics, it should work that way. That's sort of intuitive. And similarly here, left and right, the ground point should only go there and should only go there. So we have this notion of like the ground point, right? And we would want to make sure it stays on the deck. But what I noticed is I can't really use this same collision rectangle. Oh, well, let me also explain this red box here. So what is that? This is actually the area that detects like which deck panel you're presently standing on. So the starting area deck is split up into these 4 sections, right? So every time I go on like one of these here, like let's say I go here, then that's a panel area, that's a panel, that's a panel, that's a panel. Okay. So when I'm on each of these panels, that's like, it's detected as a separate thing. So this is basically the collision detection logic telling me like what panel am I on. So there's some fairly like precise math that's done just to figure that out, but it needs to be, again, intuitive. There needs to be a feeling like if the game decides that you died because the deck panel collapsed, you as the player want to feel like that was the right, decision. You want to feel like it was fair. So that's what that is. Anyway, I recognize that I need a totally different kind of collision system for the buildings on the deck, which means that I effectively need to do I need to like test sort of different collision geometry against these buildings. So I can't use the same rectangle here, right, and the same kind of bounding box, which is all of this pink area. I can't really use that for buildings because when I was using that, I was not able to really walk between the buildings. So there kind of isn't really like a one size fits all solution for that, is sort of what I'm saying. And I just have to figure out what that new collision system is going to be. This is the collision system for enemies. So enemies will respond to this this collision geometry. So if an enemy kind of comes through, he'll bounce off of this rock like that because it's just a big square. So he'll hit that, and then he will go up to the deck, right? He'll collide with the deck. He can't actually get onto the deck. So that's that collision geometry. But then I have this other mode. Wait. This mode. Yeah, okay. This is actually what I was testing. This mode, although it's not totally correct, because it really shouldn't. Oh, no, wait, it would. Yeah, that actually is correct. So this last mode here for collision detection is the player with respect to buildings. And you notice that it's drawing that what I suspect I want the collision logic to be, the rectangles. It's drawing them, but it isn't. It's not yet responding to it, right? So and this kind of goes with like my how shall we say, like development philosophy with respect to with respect to systems like this, especially like a collision system. one of the things I've come to appreciate over the years of working with systems like collision detection, it's really a good idea to just at the start, the very first thing you should do is draw, like have the game have some kind of debug visualization of what is being tested, right? Because if you're not drawing it and then like seeing, did it test that thing correctly, you're just going to be in like a world of hurt. And you're just going to be kind of in this like, it'll feel like most sort of enterprise software development where somebody gives you like a black, like some kind of black box tool or like some kind of API, and like you gotta like kind of guess what it's doing. I hate that. I much prefer just saying, okay, well, first let's start by being able to see what we can do, right? To seeing like what are we testing here, and we're testing this rectangle that is created by the building, and then this rectangle is the player's collision rectangle. And maybe maybe those rectangles are wrong, and that's fine. Like they could be wrong, but it's a good to have a starting point, even if it's wrong, that we can at least see, right? Like that's so much more important. So that's what I'm doing. I can at least see it. Now I just need to change the logic so that so that the game, I'm not only seeing it, but the game is also testing it, right? So we got to do that. All right, so how do we do that? Well, there's a function in the game's logic where we do that. So I'm going to go there. I've got too much stuff open. So I kind of have a lot of different stuff going on here. But I basically over time have coalesced, and a lot of this will probably change. It'll probably be incorrect, but that's okay. For now, this is doing pretty much all of the heavy lifting for collision detection and response. Is this one function, run collision detection and response on wall colliding entity, right? So where does this thing get called? It gets called once for every player, right? So it's the player colliding with his environment, or just once for the player, because there's only one player for now. And then it gets called another time for other entities which are in the world, things like zombies or neighbors or whatever, enemies basically. So for every enemy in the world, this gets run, right? So that's important context to know, because depending on the kind of thing that you're putting into this function, you're going to be doing different stuff, right? And actually, the player, it turns out, is a bit of a special case. I don't know if there's really enough cases to say that this is a special case, but it's a little bit of it differs from running it on the enemies, because the enemies, we're only really ever going to test one kind of collision geometry. So we're going to test the rectangle, like one rectangle for the enemy up against the rectangles for like the deck and that kind of stuff. But for the player, we're doing like two tests. So we've got the one collision rectangle for the player with respect to the outside edge of the deck, right? Like, are you going off the borders here? And we've got a different rectangle for the player and any buildings, right? They're also on the deck. So that makes this function not so simple and not so straightforward. And it actually has to change to accommodate that additional case, right? So how would we do that, right? Well, one thing I would say is, first of all, let's look at like how this, by the way, If you want to get a very in-depth take or perspective on how to actually build this particular collision function from the ground up, I would recommend Handmade Hero by Casey Muratori. This is roughly around, I think, episode 50 is where I can't remember exactly, but it's somewhere around there. Most of this logic is actually lifted straight from there because he does like it's a simple kind of rectangular tile-based collision detection. That's all this is. That's all that I've needed actually for this kind of game. But perhaps I would need something more sophisticated later. Maybe like something, I don't know, like polygons or whatever. But this has been acceptable for now. And I might add that it's actually very difficult to find good resources on collision detection and response, which are not of the object-oriented flavor. I spent so much time searching for that kind of material, and I just, like, it's awful, man. Like, all of it, it's like really abstract, and it's actually difficult to just, get straight to the point of like what needs to happen. So someone should write like a non-object oriented collision detection and response textbook. I would purchase that immediately. So here we go. Basically, for players and angry neighbors, we're going to run them against the tile map. So the tile map at the present contains information about like collision detection data. So we're gonna run the player against that, and we're doing that right now for this thing called the player collision value, which is probably not all that well described. That's probably a bad variable name at this point. But basically, that's the like we're saying, hey, does the tile map contain a tile that has that the player would collide with? And what this is actually it's the edge of the deck. So basically, all the perimeter around the deck, the value is 2, and all the stuff inside the deck, the value is 0. So that's what we call empty space. So it's checking it for that. So that's and then what we're running it against essentially, min corner max corner is basically that collision geometry that I showed you with the sort of offset downwards rectangle, right, for the player. So that's what we're running it against. But what we actually need to do is run it twice, right? So what that means now, of course, is that there's going to be an extra hit test. So it's going to be something like this, right? Entity type is player, right? It's because we're only testing the player against the stuff that's on the deck. And I added a different collision map value that just represents things that the player would collide with on the deck. So that would be building collision map value 2. Okay. So, all good. We're going to do a hit test of the position, but it's different. Why is it different? Well, because like min corner, max corner, this stuff here, right? And again, we're basically coming up. This is this theory of the Minkowski sum. As I understand it, and as I've described it previously on my. Again, it's kind of difficult to like get to when you start reading all this abstract mathematics. It's like, gosh, like could somebody, could one of these eggheads just like tell me like straightforward what we're doing here? But my really quick and dirty take on it is we're basically transforming a detection of a is a point inside of a bounding box to just testing a single point. So it's like a way of transforming a test by because it's difficult to know if something, if you think about it, you're wanting to actually no, rather we want to know if the bounding edge of a box is inside of another box, right? Okay, well that's, or if the area of another box, some section of an area of a box, like overlaps with another box, right? It's difficult to do that. If you think about it, it's almost like a Zeno paradox problem, because to really know, you would actually need to test every infinitesimal point that makes up the area of that box, right? But I guess you could check like that bounding edges as well. But, and then at one point it's like, it gets to be, you could try and transform that into a lot of different point tests. But that's very inefficient, right? Because the more fine-tuned your point tests become, then the more of them you're going to have to do, you'd use up too much CPU. So then kind of the question is there a way to transform that sort of overlapping area test into just a single point test, right? And actually the Minkowski sum, as I understand it, is the way to do that. We come up with a Minkowski width and a Minkowski height, and then we come up with some way of calculating the collision geometry based on that. Based on that Minkowski width and height, to transform it from this like weird kind of like overlapping area test into a more simple, straightforward point test. So that's what I understand this to be doing. So all I really need to do here is change this so that it's running some different, it's not using this value up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of like calculate this stuff. I'm going to rename a bunch of this. Probably going to come up with a function, actually, come to think of it, that takes in the collision geometry, because it's getting repeated again. So we're going to do that. And then I'm going to, and actually, what is that? That's a rectangle too, because that min corner, max corner. So basically this is like a testable collision rectangle, right? I think that's right. I'll call it get Minkowski rectangle. I don't know. I actually would really love to have just it would be great if there were a more in-depth collision system like video tutorial series where you like imagine Handmade Hero, but like the only focus is we just start with two-dimensional graphics and we only do like all of the different kinds of collision detection that you could implement. That would be very useful, actually. I would love to have something like that. Just two-dimensional graphics, like start with this kind of like rectangle approach and then also go through like triangles, polyhedra, that kind of thing. Circle, something like a circle, although there's no real circles that you're testing. You're testing basically some kind of N polygon, right? It would be so cool to have. I really wish we had that. But we don't have that. Or at least I'm not aware that we have it. What do we need to pass in? We need to pass in tile map star. And all I'm going to do here is I'm just like I'm just making a function out of the stuff that existed previously, and then I'm going to use the function, then I'm going to build on the function to do the new thing that I want to do. Which some call refactoring, I just call common sense. Let's see, what do we have? Collision geometry. Yeah. Collision geometry. What's kind of cool is I've really just built up these abstractions bit by bit, and so because I'm actually using them, I'm very familiar with the ground truth of the game. I'm very familiar with the ground truth of what I'm doing. And I'm already, it's like, I'm just, hello, hello, Noah. I'm just using this. Okay, no, I'm doing great. I'm just reusing something that I'm already using. All I'm doing is I'm like making it just slightly more abstract. And so then I'm going to return that. So now I have this, right? So that I've got this get Minkowski rectangle, and then I'm going to use that to calculate all of this stuff, right? So min corner, max corner will go away. And I have this, right? And then I'm just passing in my stuff. And again, I'm not gonna, okay, that sounds good. I turned it up a little bit. Let's just say, I'll just say general collision rectangle. I don't know. I'm going to change the name of that because it's going to be really clear. I don't know. Player and enemy. Thanks. It's blue. Okay, so player and enemy collision rectangle. And then I'm just gonna go back down here inside this collision function. And here I'm not gonna do anything with this yet. I'm gonna come back to that. And I'm gonna go like, to do, bring this back or something. So we'll eventually get back to testing that, but I am going to do, this player and enemy collision rectangle, and then dot min corner, dot max corner. Yeah. So that should about do it. So then next I'm going to have to get this other kind of collision geometry. Which games do I like? Oh my God, man. I love so many games. I've played so many games. Like, that's a very, very long list of games. But I'm making a roguelike deck builder game. And I like roguelike deck builders. I played Hades on stream. I played Peglin on stream. What else did I play? I haven't played them a lot. I also love puzzle games. I made a puzzle game. I made a puzzle game called Moosolutions, but I'm not streaming that right now. And I like a lot of the newer kinds of puzzle games. So I'm a big fan of that genre as well. I like a lot of strategy games. So particularly, I used to really like the 4X genre, but I think I played it too much to like it anymore. But I really like Slipways. Slipways is a really great game. I highly recommend that one. Gosh, I could go on and on. And if I did, then I wouldn't be working on this. So, but I like a lot of games. Okay, so I'm just gonna compile this and like run it, and then and again, we're not doing anything like earth shattering here. We're just, hey, like, do the players, see, getting problems already, some compile time issues. Okay, where I'm at, 217 GG dot min. Oh yeah, okay, that's right, dot max. And actually, this hit test position could probably take a rectangle, because like, I'm basically passing a rectangle into it. So like, why don't I just do that instead? So I'm actually gonna like just put a to do up there, and then go back up to, and I'll just make sure that like I pass that in. What do I do for a living? I have done a lot of things for a living. Right now, my only means of making income is through stock market investments, a very supportive spouse, some from games, some from YouTube. I have a lot of pots that generate money. I even have a Patreon. Pass in a rectangle for min corner and max corner. And I have previously also lived on software freelancing, although I'm not really taking any contracts right now. I suppose it's not that I'm like not totally open to it, but I think it would have to be like part-time or something. So I have to, but yeah, I want to continue to prototype out some new game ideas and work on some new games. Potentially, if people like the games, make more money on a different game. So, yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to increase the portion of my income that I make from games, basically, so that I could be self-sustaining just from games. And I think that would be cool. You're a visual artist. Very cool. I need visual artists badly at some point, but not right now. I have great respect for visual artists because people like you make it possible to market a game. You make it possible to create these wonderful aesthetic environments that people and players absolutely love. And you're 100% like critical to games. I strongly believe that. There's so many games that they have great gameplay, and that alone might have made it do really well, but having that visual polish and art direction, consistent style. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't know that you'd be able to do this on the stream, but I have a Discord. At the end of the stream, I'll post the link to the Discord, and then you can join there, or I don't know that you could just put it in the chat. That would be another thing too. But yeah, I absolutely love to talk to artists. My dad's actually an artist, which is really cool. My dad does wildlife art, so I come from a family where we respect it. Okay, so running it. All right, so now again, I should not expect there to be really anything different in terms of, and so I've got my different, how shall we call them? Collision visualization modes, right? So that's what I'm doing here. And yeah, I mean, it still works, even though I quote unquote refactored my code. I hate the word refactor, but that's basically, I moved it into more of a reusable function so that I could use it for some other stuff, basically. So that's what I did. Seems to be working more or less. Wait, this is the, Okay. I need to like watch this. Okay. That's broken. um, so what am I testing here? Because I also modified the code for enemies. I'm also like, I want to make sure that the enemies are, this is my enemy debug visualization, like collision visualization mode. So I just want to make sure that enemies collide off of surfaces, that they don't, and so that's working. Did you see that enemy there? He kind of collided off of that. And he's kind of like also colliding on the edge of that rock there. Oh, something's up here. What is this? I'm stuck. Well, that's unusual. I was not expecting that. Okay, so something's wrong, but I'm not really sure what. Something about I was able to get into a state. So that's not good. Yeah. I'm not sure how that happened. I'm also not. Okay, well, I'm gonna have to fix that. Username on Discord. I can share that afterwards, but I just want to kind of like finish the stream. So, let's see. What could I have possibly done here that messed with things? I don't feel like maybe the thing is like if that was a problem that was already in there to begin with, that would be bad. What did I change that would have done that? Collision geometry. Min corner, max corner. All right. This might be a difficult one to sort of like figure out what's going on. I did something though that somehow I got outside of the bounds of the deck, and that was bad. But doesn't seem to be happening right now. I might just have, that might have been a fluke occurrence. Maybe it happens when I'm in the shooting mode. I'm trying to figure out if it's really worth tracking this one down or if it's worth doing something else, because if it's really that rare, then I'm not really sure. You know, the thing about this thing is it can easily turn into a rabbit hole that consumes all of your attention and time when there's other things that you should be doing. So I always have to be like really cautious about that. There are going to be bugs, and they're worth ironing out. Just never at so early stage where you're exploring a game concept, because I would much rather be at a point where, let's say my game has robust funding, I've got a following, I've got people excited about it, it's getting promoted, and we're just at that last stage of like, you know, figuring out these like really tiny problems, because then I can bring in a specialist, like a collision detection specialist, and I can pay them gobs of money and they can like help solve the problem for me. But not, or I could maybe, you know, like take a few days and like get really, really like read some books and really understand. It's probably a problem with floating point math. So unless that same kind of getting stuck problem happens a lot more, I'm not going to worry about it. That's sort of a line I have to draw in the sand in a prototyping stage. So that's what I have to do. So far, I'm going to say that was kind of victorious. Okay, so now I've got this player and enemy collision rectangle, right? what I also want to calculate is this other rectangle that's like, I only want to do it if the entity type is rectangle 2, player and deck structure collision rectangle, right? I'm just going to say that's null right now, just starting out. And then I'm only going to do anything with it if the entity type that I'm passing into this thing is a player. So if we're dealing with players, then there we go. Then we'll do something with this. So what kind of collision geometry? So obviously we can't use this same collision geometry here. We need to use something else. So what is it? It's going to be something like, and actually, again, I created this function at the earlier, like right before I dealt with this. This is my kind of catch-all. Give me the collision rectangle. And this is the same, the important thing to note is like earlier on in the stream, I was like, hey, let's at least draw what we're colliding up against, right? And I said it should be like, we should at least see what we're trying to run the collision system against. So that thing that's being drawn actually also draws its data from this function. So if it's drawing its data from this function, then I have a reasonable guarantee that that's what's going to be used, right? So we're going to do that. We're going to say, I think what was the type? Get collision geometry. Yeah, type is just collision geometry. Player and deck structure collision geometry equals this thing. Probably need multiple lines for that. Got to pass in, oh, that's my dad calling, but I can't talk to him right now, so I'll talk to him afterwards. Entity type is player, and then whether we're in the building mode is going to be true. That's the sort of exception here. Right? And then we're going to pass this player and deck structure collision geometry thing into here. What I'm hoping is that all of this just beautifully falls into place, you know, like a lovely Sunday roast. And I get the actual kind of like collision behavior that I want. That would be lovely. So if we're dealing with players, then we're going to do this. I think at this point I can get rid of this. So we're going to do that. Yeah, and so what? Yeah, okay, good. So this is my thing saying if it's a player and it's a building collision map, we should be able to do something with this, I think. Oops. 170. That would be cool if it just worked. Again, I don't, you know, how robust do we want to make this? That's a bit of a different question. But if it's pretty, and it's always the tough thing that you do when you're prototyping anything is I'm going to keep repeating it again and again because I have friends who could use this advice, people that I desperately want to help out with, you know, launching something or shipping it. It's like when you're this early on, it cannot be that robust. It has to be like just, you know, you have to know that you're going to come back and do it later. And that when it's time to ship, you really will solve this problem. So, and I guess that's something that shipping, it's an experience that shipping makes you appreciate, right? So this this, this ought to work, I think. I'm going to try it out, see how it goes. What I'm looking for, okay. All right. So now that I've got a somewhat like slightly confusing, okay. So this is like the collision detection logic of the player against the deck, and that all seems to be pretty good. Maybe when you know what I bet that was? I bet I actually like clipped into this space in between these things. So maybe a way to fix that is to make the tiles like a little bit, maybe make that area just like a little bit fatter so that there's actually no space in between. I may have actually tunneled there. And then if you tunnel, you're just like, you're screwed. Like that's a thing about, you know, you look at like old school Mario Brothers, like, oh man, once you tunnel into that collision system, like, that's how everybody cheats, by the way. Okay, so that's my expectations for like how it goes in the deck seem to be okay. Now I'm gonna look at this other, this, right? Oh, cool. Oh, this is awesome. Yes. Awesome. I am thrilled actually at the moment. This is me beaming with joy because I have now, not only does the player not go off the deck, which is what I want, but there's this like little nice space that the player can walk in between any buildings that are on the deck. So if there's like, you know, some buildings here, if there's another building there. One thing I'm going to do just for debug purposes, I'm going to turn on cheap debug mode again. Actually, first thing I'm going to do is commit this change because it's actually pretty good. So, hey, the collision system works. I have very unserious commit messages. I think I fundamentally don't care about the commit messages, but I guess maybe that's just because it's only me, you know, and I'm like a team of one. So yeah, it works, and that's good. And now I want to, I've been using this, it's a bit of a cheat code, so I've been using that thing. It's called cheap debug mode. All this does, it's a single flag that I hit that when it's true, then now none of the buildings cost anything. So that's what I'm doing. I'm making it so that like none of the buildings cost anything. So that's kind of cool. All right, so none of the buildings cost anything. I can place a repair bay and I can place a turret down, and then what I want to do is just, I want to see, hey, can I walk in between those things? Oh, this is awesome. Now, you notice, okay, so this is just gameplay, right? It's pretty close to what I want it to be. And obviously another thing too is like the graphics are going to be different. The player's not going to have the same shade of gray as is on the turret. So like, notice how when I'm here, the turret is actually, it's kind of like blending in, and that looks a little bit weird. So I don't like that. Another thing too is I think that this rectangle should be slightly offset, right? So here I've got the rectangle offset a bit up. But what you can imagine is if this actually were a three-dimensional scene, it's not, but pretend that it is because we're just doing two-dimensional graphics. It would make sense if the player were kind of like up and in front of this thing here. So, oh boy, and then there's some other kind of fun things that I have thought about that are just like, it's not that I shouldn't do them, but so I think I'm gonna offset this test rectangle down a little bit. What would that do? It would prevent me from walking here this way, right? So I'd have a little bit less space on the top, but I think I'd be willing to accept that. because this is absurd. Maybe you should be able to do this. Actually, maybe that's okay. This is absurd, right? Because the player should actually be able to walk up closer to the structures, right? So I think that's very much necessary. Um, but you see how, again, I do this a lot on the stream, but what I've tried to show you within the span of just 1 hour is if you want to, especially when you're dealing with something like collision, it's very, very useful if you're trying to debug it or trying to figure out if it's working or not. Really do like spend the time to put in some kind of debug visualization mode, something where you can see like exactly what is being tested, because otherwise you're going to be kind of like punching in the dark there. And I don't know about you, but like as a programmer, I generally strongly dislike punching in the dark. Not my favorite thing to do. Do I feel like the amount of space in between these things is good? Yeah, that's good. So, more or less, I would say this system like works. It's what I want. There are a few small tweaks to it that are more like graphical presentation. For example, and actually, what I would be able to do, because my quote unquote engine, right, the big gob of code that I have left over from my last project, because my engine supports Z layering of sprites, I can make it so that the players, yeah, that might be it could be a difficult problem to solve. I'm not 100% sure if it is or not, but I could make it so that the player's Z layer, or like, yeah, the player's layer goes behind these buildings, but not always, right? Because sometimes it needs to go in front, right? So it would need to go in front if the player is below, but it would need to go behind if the player is above. Although a lot of that kind of hinges on whether or not, as an art style, I decide to go with sprite art, or I mean, sorry, not sprite art, but like two-dimensional art style, right? 2D graphics versus three-dimensional graphics. If I do 3D graphics, then the Z buffer handles all that for me. So this is a problem that I recognize would need to be solved if I were to commit fully to two-dimensional graphics. But that's more of a design decision. So I think the whole idea of picking the layer for the player to go on and like solving that math problem, unless it's like really easy, if I could just bang it out in like an hour or two, then maybe that's fine, right? But if I can't just bang it out in an hour or two, then it's a much more robust kind of a problem that I would have to look into. My intuition, what does my intuition tell me? Yeah, maybe I'll think about it on my like drive to go work out today or something, but it doesn't immediately strike me as an easy problem, but maybe it is. Um, maybe it's something like, in most cases, draw them in front of the player, right? Draw the buildings in front of the player, like in almost all cases, unless the distance from the player is significant enough. Actually, this is turning out to be, now that I think about it, it might be easier than I think. Because the case that I'm only really interested in is like how close is the entity to the player, right? And so that should determine its Z layer. And then what I want to figure out is like, what's the relationship between the entity and like, what is that distance? And then is the player in front of or behind the thing? But for basically everything else in the, right now that's in the game, it's actually not really a concern, because all I could do is just, it wouldn't even matter if I have it on a layer that's behind or in front of the player, because the player, for most things, most of the time, is not near the thing. So I wouldn't really need to do that kind of logic, if that makes sense. So it might actually not be that harder or that much more difficult to figure out. But long aside, sort of an engineer thing. Um, anyway, um, at this point, I will just I'm about to wrap up, so I'll kind of like read some comments. So. Dan Salvato made a flowchart of Super Mario Brothers 1 collision detection routine and posted it on Reddit. It's a full page with a lot of fairly small text. Right. Yeah, exactly. Like I would expect that it has to be. I mean, also considering the constraints, like I don't think, you know, back then because they had to like write it in assembly language for the Nintendo for their original Nintendo. And so I would imagine that it's much less abstract, and they probably have to do a bunch of funny things with, registers and all that stuff that you wouldn't really have to do with a higher level language like C. Um, so I sort of feel a little bit privileged and lucky that I can use a higher level language like C to sort of almost like gloss over or simplify some of these problems that it seems like would otherwise require quite a bit of digging in the weeds. But I don't know, maybe I go and I read the article and I'm just like, whoa, even if I do have a higher level language, this actually is pretty difficult, right? I suspect it actually is pretty difficult. Um, just, and that's what sucks is like for a lot of these games, it's actually such a crucial system, and maybe I'm wrong, like maybe somebody will post a link to a really, really good book on collision detection. I would love that. But thus far, pretty much every text that I've tried to find on the subject matter has been kind of abysmally object oriented in nature and very difficult to follow, very difficult to integrate into an existing game, right? And I'm not sure exactly why that is. It's like maybe the people that wrote the books haven't made full games from scratch or something. No, but I will look for it. Krister Erickson. Okay, actually, let's look for it on stream. Okay, Krister Erickson. Is that maybe I didn't spell it correctly? What's it called? Is it called like collision detection? Real-time collision. Okay. Is it good? Should I get it? Real-time collision detection? No, I'm seeing it for sure. This is it, right? $100. Better be good. Better be good. Better be really, really good. Okay. I will add it to my watch list, or I will star it or something. Um, yeah. Oh, and this is used even. My gosh. Okay. Wow. Um, I'm curious. You got a PDF from someone at work. Um, did you find? Okay. So I don't want a copy of the PDF. If it's good, I will buy it because I believe in supporting people like that. Um, is it good? Like, is it free of object-oriented dogma? Can I follow it? Like, let's say like what I would love to have is a collision detection text that maybe would tell me how to do like the collision system in Braid, right? Because in that game, they just did, what did they, it seems like they did some kind of like polygon mesh system, right? That's my guess, because you could like walk up and down slopes. That was really cool. So it's not just squares, but I would like something where it would just give me like the basic rundown of how would I do real-time collision detection and response in 2D with polygonal things that I'm testing against. I feel like that would cover a lot of bases and I would learn a great deal. And then maybe like towards the end, it could start to get into three-dimensional stuff. That would also be very useful for me, although I'm not really presently working on any 3D stuff, but it would be, I would find that useful. Oh, I see. Okay, so interesting. It's a little bit. What do you mean AAA focused? You mean like it's lots of polygons bounding? Okay, interesting. Yeah, so not something that would necessarily like simplify it. Hmm. I wish I had something that would start with more simplified cases and then kind of like build up my knowledge to three-dimensional stuff. But um, maybe there's like some use, like some utility in. So one thing that I discovered, detection, not resolution. Yeah, that's the problem though. Like a lot of games, I need more than just the detection. I also need real time response, right? So, in what what I find so valuable about what Casey Muratori did on stream so long ago was not only did he show you like how you would just do like point in rectangle collision, but he also shows you real time how to do the response and how to modify the velocity vector and like create a whole thing, a whole system that actually like works and works well and is robust. I just found that so impressive. And then when I go and I read these collision detection texts, I'm just like, none of them are doing that, and that sucks. You know, um, it's really it's really unfortunate. So there's definitely like an unmet need, I would say, in the marketplace for some kind of text. I wish, yeah, I'd love to support this. I'd love to buy this book, but I just feel like it's going to be more similar stuff to what I've read, and I don't know. Maybe it's like with 3D in particular. One thing I will say that is true about um, 3D in relation to 2D is I will say now without qualification that it was genuinely useful for me to learn 3D graphics even without necessarily having a 3D game that I was working on. So what I would say is that the 2 or so months that I spent just implementing like building like a 3D kind of modeling sort of system or like just show it like drawing 3D models on screen, all that stuff, transforming the coordinates, all of it, just for a really simple thing. I think I had just like a grid with like a guy on it and I could move the guy around. That actually was so useful for building up my knowledge to do 2D stuff that now I just look back and I'm like, man, I wish I had done that earlier. So maybe that's the case with collision detection stuff too. Maybe if you do it in 3D, you sort of like build up the chops to do it in 2D. So that might be some sense in which I'm wrong here. But anyway, no, cool discussion. Are there any other questions for today's stream? Oh, that's great. I'm stoked that you love it. Yeah, hopefully it's doing something unique. I think what it is, if I'm what I'm trying to do is it's kind of like imagine if you could see Braid being prototyped, right? I don't think there exists something like that. And I know like a lot of engineer people that I interact with. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, right, right. And that's the thing is like there's a lot. I feel like there's a lot of people doing it from scratch, but they're not really prototyping gameplay, right? So a lot of it's like let's build the deep systems, like let's build the rendering, the sound, and all, and like that's good. Like we need that. Like the engine stuff is necessary, but I don't really see a lot of people like saying I want to make this kind of game, and I'm going to show you how to prototype a game, right? Because that's like it's a very different skill set, in my opinion, from knowing from like building something very robust. It's a subtle skill set almost. It's very different in a lot of ways, and I think I want to show more engineering type people how they could do that, because I think if I can, then we'll actually start to see more finished games, you know, instead of just like a lot of hobby projects, which are cool, but I think a totally finished game is better. So anyway, with that, I'll see you next time.